and Block he thinks he may be president someday. Oh, Mr. Block, you were born by mistake. You take the cake, you make me ache. Tie a rock on your block and then jump in the blue lake. Kindly do that for liberty's sake.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dave. Thanks for joining Bob and I for our podcast, Thriving in Dystopia. And even though we always try and be professionals, sometimes we swear. So just know that going in. Oh boy. We got a special one coming at you. I'm just going to start us off, Bob, by introducing the guest coming right out from you, right from Golden, Colorado. We got one of the longest friends in our circle, Dan Cantrick, today. And I've known Dan since 6th grade, and we've been tight, well over 20 years. And it's just going to be so great to have him on the show. And, I felt like it's hard to talk about all the accolades that Dan has done. But one of the things that Dan did that has affected me more than most is he came up with some of the best bumper stickers that you could ever imagine. And I'm going to share my top 3 that he came up with. I think this was probably like in 2014 when Dan was taking a eco activist class at Naropa. And the first one is, have your drink on the rocks, climb a mountain. And the next one that really spoke to me was less roads, more frogs. And the one that I quote literally every day of my life is flashlights darken everything around them. So anyways, Dan, I don't want to talk about all your accolades, but welcome to the show. Welcome to Thriving, Danny.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and be talking to the two of you. I love the podcast, and I'm excited for this. And I want to make a little amendment to one of those bumper stickers. There's 2 versions of for the one that you mentioned about frogs, because frog and toad, they're very similar. So you can say less roads, more toads, and you get that rhyme.
Of course. I was just trying to come up with them on the spot. Man, when you sent us those bumper sticker ideas, I was like, that was one of my goals in life, is to get those actually on a car. But yeah.
Wow.
Anyhow, Bob, how you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, it's so exciting to have Dan here. I will add a little bit of an introduction to what you said, just to give listeners a little bit more of a view of who Dan is. And
I don't know. I think the bumper stickers really are going to speak for themselves there, Bob.
Dan is a titan in the bumper sticker industry, but that's only a small fraction of how he spends his time. Dan is, actually just a prolific musician and has, background in classical guitar, but also, part of some great jam sessions. And we all admire Dan for his guitar skills. Dan taught me how to play bass a little bit as well about 10 years ago. And then Dan's also a really amazing writer. He, has a MFA in writing and from Naropa. And that's one reason we have him on the show today. And I'll introduce the show in a little bit, but just wanted to give a little bit more and ask you, Dan, how is your day going, and where are you right now in the world?
Thanks, Bob. That was really, really nice of you to say all that. My day is going, it's going well. I was excited to talk to you all today. You have rejuvenated some of my passions, and I've been doing I've been diving into some of my old work and some of the poetry that has always moved me, but I maybe haven't revisited recently. And it feels especially nice to be revisiting it now during the pandemic and the state of the world, and a reminder of how powerful and important poetry is at this moment, as well as music too. I've been playing a lot of music. I am actually broadcasting. Is that what it's called? Podcasting, broadcasting is. I don't know the technical differences.
I think we call it narrow casting. At least what we do here is it's the narrow street.
Oh, the narrow street. Okay. Yeah, right. Something about don't narrowcast podcast. Put it on a bumper sticker. I'm
the man at work.
Yeah. So I'm actually in between Golden, where I live in the canyon, a canyon outside of Golden, and Fort Collins, where Dave is. I'm in between in South Boulder proper, and utilizing a reliable internet connection to make sure this all goes smoothly.
Oh, yes.
I love when we get some podcasting coming out of good old Boulder, Colorado. Thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's great. Well, say hi to your folks for us. I'm assuming you're at your parents' place?
That is correct.
Nice. That's great. They're going to love this episode.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Has the cold been biting you up in the Canyonlands, Danny?
In a sense, we live on the side of the canyon that is completely shaded for about 6 months of the year. This was not known to us when we moved in the early summer. I think it was mentioned in passing. I didn't take real note of it, and now I'm noticing it, because you have one side of the canyon that is up until, well, last night we got a dusting of snow up there, but before that, the side of the canyon was completely clear and sunny, and then you see our side in our house, and we're covered in snow that's been hanging around for weeks now. But it's a beautiful sight still. You know, you can't beat a snowy canyon wall, you know, as far as the beautiful evergreens popping out of that white snow. It's beautiful.
Dan, you just painted a nice picture there. I remember when you and I went hiking in the Rockies, and we were actually looking for a podcast stand by Mike Bishop, and we got turned back because the river blew out a bridge, and so we never found Bish. But don't worry, he made an appearance on the podcast, so he was all right. But that you just reminded me of that image.
Yes, totally. I think of that hike very fondly, even though it was like we didn't necessarily achieve the goal. But, you know, we let go of that, and I think learned a lot. And then on another, I'm also thinking of a snowy hike that we maybe did do with Bish. And I was introduced to the term post-holing for the first time.
Oh, yes. Dan, could you tell our listeners what it means to post-hole?
Yes. So post-holing, I'll paint a quick picture for you, a quick story. We show up at this trailhead. What was it? Outside of like Grand Lake, maybe?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And we show up there in shorts and t-shirts in full sun with snowshoes strapped to the back of our packs, which in itself is a little bit of a paradox. And we start on this hike, and we're passing all these people that, whether they said something or not, I know they were quietly judging us for having snowshoes on a hot, sunny day. But as we got deeper and deeper into the canyon, some snow started to appear, and we started to get some reports from the hikers that had made it all the way to the end. And they started talking to us about how well prepared we were with our snowshoes, because the last mile or two is nothing but post-holing. And post-holing is like kind of nature's trickery. As you start to hit snow, and then you start to walk over the snow, and you're feeling okay about it, and suddenly the ground falls out from under you, and you sink 3 feet down past your knees, and you're stuck in there like quicksand. That's the classic post-hole, which is why you got the snowshoes.
Great story, Dan. That's a hashtag Lone Eagle.
Yes, hashtag Lone Eagle.
Yes. And I don't think we have time for this, but Dan wrote a song about one of our hiking mates that maybe we'll go into next week, but we'll just leave it there for now because I know we got some content to get into. But yeah,
wow, cliffhangers.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I could introduce the show, and then Dave, you can like focus us in on what we're going to do today. So
oh boy, I don't want to be the focus guy.
You're the focus, Dave. You're the focusman. Dave Focusman this week.
Yeah. All right. I'll focus us in.
So the overall topic for today, having Dan on the show, is poetic activism. And Dan is someone that I already said, just a very skilled and complex writer, and poetry is so important to his work. He's actually read some of his poetry at the Peachtree Wedding, I believe. So that's pretty awesome. And Dan is also a longtime activist, and holds these values that are consistent with thriving around revolutionary change and liberation, and has studied poetry and history. So we thought, what is the role of poetry in activism? What is the role of poetry in social change? At the micro and the macro levels. So we thought Dan Cantrick, the best person to bring in on this topic. I'll pass it over to you, Dave.
Yeah. So as I focus, we might walk down this path of a road less traveled, as it were. Just kidding. There will be no more Robert Frost references. Yeah, we don't really know where we're going to get to today. That's for sure. And just like the content that is out there is that we could push down towards, it feels like it's going to be immense. So as per usual, we ask someone on the show and it's like, it'll just be like a quick 30-minute thing or whatever. And then we're already planning next week's episode and already got a soft commit from Dan to come back because we feel like we're just going to get down all kinds of paths. But I think where we really want to start this week is sort of walking the history path and thinking about, unions and the Wobblies and anarchists out in Spain in the 1930s. And we'll see if we can walk all the way down to, Edward Abbey and eco poetry and push back past into modern day, but we don't know how far we're going to get. And I think, Danny, where we really want to start is asking you the question, what moves you? And specifically, what moves you in literature? What moves you in poetry? Where does the prose take you? And see where that gets us going.
For me, and I always wonder if this is because of my background in music, but I notice in both prose and poetry, what gets me right away is the sounds, the rhythms, the word choice, the language, how the word spills off of the tongue. I very much love going to poetry readings and really experiencing the performative aspect of poetry and how people deliver the rhythms of their words. And that's the first thing that I go to in a work. It's like instantly the language over even thinking about the meaning of the poem or whatever. I'm listening to the musicality of it and the words. I love combinations of words together that are new, have a new sound to me. And that's what initially drew me to poetry and what I fell in love with, and then moved more to like cross-genre work that is prose and poetry together and breaking the conventions of these two things being separate. Yeah, that's what really drew me to that. And actually, Claudia Rankine, a well-known and very well-regarded poet and essayist and playwright, editor, just a prolific writer who most recently is quite known for her book of poetry, Citizen, an American lyric, which was award-winning and I think transformative on so many levels for all kinds of people that study poetry or were able to encounter this work. And she was recently interviewed in the New York Times Book Review a couple weeks ago. And I think for a while, I've definitely had the idea of sound in my head as the factor that draws me to poetry and literature, and as the first thing that brings me in. But she was asked a similar question, and she summarized it very briefly and clearly. And it when she said it, it struck me. And she basically said she's held by the beauty of the language first and foremost, as opposed to simply being carried along by the plot. And that's in a nutshell what does it for me. That's how I get drawn into a work.
Yeah, I really like that too. I also feel like inadvertently the question has this idea of, when you think of movement, it feels like almost a visceral and like a physical response. And I know that, it could be a many different things, but the musicality of, like, when you think about rhythm and motion coming together, you think about dance. And I love that idea of pushing those two genres together, because I feel like that answer feels real to me. I don't know if that's where my head would go personally, but I really like that feeling that it evokes, Yeah,
I love it too. Yeah. And you refocused me, Dan. You tilted my head, and I so often go to content. So what you said gives me a step back, and I really appreciated what you just said, and I'm curious to explore the relationship of what you said, the plot to like lyricality or lyrics, as we move forward in what we look at today.
Yeah. I mean, it's, so many times I've encountered a work and I couldn't even tell you what it was about on the first read, but I was in. I was drawn to it. It was, I needed to hear it again and again. So just the sound itself has an emotional impact, and it has, there's meaning there. And like, I like what you said about dance and the body, and thinking about how this, like what's happening in the body when I hear a poem, or when I read a poem, what's, connecting to the somatic and, feeling through all of that. 'Cause instantly something happens before I know what the poem is about or what it's trying to achieve. There's like a reaction, and that's what I'm really interested in and drawn to.
Yeah, well, I feel like this is a beautiful opener for where we want to go to next, and thinking about the Wobblies. I was first introduced to the I.W.W. Through our time at Left Hand Books, and which is a defunct socialist, anarchist, Marxist bookstore based out of Boulder, Colorado. And I feel like through Left Hand Books, we found our way to The People's History, which is Howard Zinn's book, of course. And he has like a long section on the Wobblies, because Zinn is such a union guy, and sort of the work that they pushed through in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And yeah, Dan, just briefly before the show, you were talking a little bit about how that poetry and that music and blends with that activism. And I'm just kind of want to hear some of your thoughts and how you want to open that up a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think with the Wobblies, the first I think my first introduction to them was through somebody telling me about their songs and how there's this strength of camaraderie and togetherness in community through song that these amazing organizers developed, and they actually came out with a collection of their songs, a songbook. It's called the Little Red Songbook. I think it initially came out in like 1909, and there's been all kinds of editions since then published through, I think, even to the mid to late 90s. And what I think is so cool about that is it's like these moments of, music has the ability to lift your spirits. And so when you're lifting spirits and you're combining that with, these very crucial, heavy topics about workers' rights and the struggle to, take down the establishment or feel represented or feel strong and feel worthy, that so much of their work did on an international level. It's like they could use songs as a way to spread their message. And what a way to do that. What a way to spread your message through songs that just carry all over. And people can learn a song. And now here we are again, back to the sound. You can learn a melody and be drawn to a melody without even knowing what the lyrics are. But suddenly you realize you're singing a song about union rights and what does that mean to you? And so, yeah, I think that's what I loved about the Wobblies, and my first introduction to them was through song. And I think there's such a connection between song and poetry and activist poetry and activist songs by the Wobblies, and their unwaverable dedication to each other. The way they stuck together, even in times of, actually being slaughtered and taken down by police, just finding strength in each other and fighting through, so that, which eventually leads to all kinds of things and the rights that we have today as workers, the 40-hour work week, getting disability or being protected when you have an injury on the job, all kinds of ways that workers were exploited at work was handled through this labor movement. And the spirit of the Wobblies, I think, is such a strong part of the history of the labor movement.
Dan, I wonder if you had a song that you could share for us, or maybe not until next week. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll just randomly flip through the songbook and find one. I have it up here, and I can just, unfortunately, I probably don't know the tune. I would need my guitar. I'm not going to sight sing, but I can recite some lyrics if you'd like.
I'd love that.
Yes. That sounds awesome.
Okay, so this, I just opened the book, flipped to this one. The words for this song and so many were early on attributed to Joe Hill, who seemed to be a prolific Wobbly and a prolific songwriter. And this is called Mr. Block, and it first appeared in the 1913 edition of the Little Red Book. And maybe I'll just read the first verse and the chorus, which goes, "Please give me your attention, and I'll introduce to you a man that is a credit to our red, white, and blue. His head is made of lumber and solid as a rock. He is a common worker, and his name is Mr. Block. In Block, he thinks he may be president someday. Oh, Mr. Block, you were born by mistake. You take the cake, you make me ache. Tie a rock on your block and then jump in the blue lake. Kindly do that for liberty's sake."
Yeah, that's pretty good. Boy, yeah. I guess I want to say that I feel like anyone that has been out on the streets probably has those moments of when you hear that voice of that song whatever that song might be. I mean, there's so much chanting, but when you hear a song when you're protesting, it feels like a special moment. And I feel like there's just not enough of that these days. And I want more of that. And I just know that like I remember I don't remember exactly where we were, but we were at some jail and this one woman just started singing, like "We Shall Not Be Moved," I believe. And that was, it was a powerful moment. So I feel like the Wobblies were really onto something by bringing that movement and that song and the emotional tone to activism, which is just like so crucial.
Maybe I have a list of famous Wobblies.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll just mention a few of them. So yeah, Joe Hill and Big Bill Haywood. We also have Pete Seeger, Eugene Debs, Noam Chomsky, Dorothy Day, Tom Morello, and last but not least, Helen Keller.
Nice.
Wow.
Pretty good list, huh?
Yeah.
That basically sums it up. What do you guys think happened to the unions? Why do you feel like I was one of the, I'm a union man. I'm a part of the Educators Alliance. I believe the PEA is what my union's called. It's just teachers union in my school district. But I feel like they're just not, they just don't have the sway that they used to have, huh?
I think Ronald Reagan had a part in that. I actually just watched a recent documentary about him, and they noted the death of the unions to I think it was a strike by the airport. What's that? Airport controllers union or airport workers strike, and it was such a critical moment when you have the president of the United States stepping in and telling these people if they don't go back to work, they're all going to lose their jobs, as if he had a say in it, as if he had the power to, take their jobs away. And that's such a threatening point when, I think the president is coming to your job and firing you, not just your boss or your supervisor. Right. I know that that was a watershed moment, all of Reagan's presidency in fighting off the unions and rewarding the corporations, as we see continue today. It's sad.
I don't mean to presuppose that unions are totally dead.
Right. Yeah, totally.
But I do know that the power is not what it once was. And I think a lot of that, has to do with the union busting and the corporations and just the intentionality of breaking these unions, So, but you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, why don't we transition to the next set of poems? I think it stays on that sort of anarchist line. Is that right, Dan? The Spanish Civil War?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I gathered some poems from the Spanish Civil War that, to me, and maybe I'd like to hear both of your views on the Spanish Civil War, but it immediately stands out to me as this, despite the horrendous acts of the Franco regime and all the horrible things he carried out, there's still a part of me as an anarchist that looks at the Spanish Civil War time period and the movements happening in Spain during that time to fight back as this like amazing time for the anarchist movement and organizing and strength and solidarity, and what they were able to do. I'm curious what the two of you think about when you hear the Spanish Civil War, like because my mind immediately goes to anarchist movement when I hear Spanish Civil War. I'm curious about two of you.
Yeah, me too. My mind goes to George Orwell and his book, Homage to Catalonia. And I think Dave and I read that on a road trip together. We read it out loud, and Orwell's awesome. His journalism's fantastic, and, political journalism, descriptions of like the anarchists in Barcelona and their organizing within the cities, like the anarcho-syndicalist like unions in the cities, co-op, worker-owned cooperatives. And then also in the rural areas, we're also like anarchist oriented. So I think it's, for me, like the most powerful or like empowered and impressive network of anarchist organizing. And like they took on two fronts. They took on the fascists, and then they took on the communists who sold them out. And I think the nationalists as well were like the previous. So that maybe three fronts, and they were able to fight for a long time, but it was too much, and there was too much international like money flowing into those other fronts. But I do think it was like a glorious moment for anarchism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like through that battle there was like so many like real successes of like the country operate. Like I feel like you have these moments of like little pieces of anarchists like communities popping up, but I feel like in like the late 30s it was this like moment where a whole country was like running through like an anarchist fashion, and it was it was an interesting experiment, and I agree that the outside world pushed too hard in so many ways. But it was also kind of like at the edge of so many different things, right? Like you mentioned, like, fascism and communism, and like the Republicans, and like how that is all pushing together. And like through that, you get this like burst of creativity, right? And a lot of these like famous like artists and authors, like Barcelona was like a hub of this creative energy. And it's interesting too, because from that it gets like totally shut down, right? And like you get this like 40-year period of like drabness in Spain, which is a funny thing to think about. But like, it's not until like the 70s and 80s when like it explodes again into this like extreme like post dictatorship, and where you get like Almodovar coming out of that. But anyways, yeah. So I feel like it's this like moment in time where there's this like creative explosion. And I think that is a pretty wonderful scene to set for some of the activism and poetry that comes out of that. It's like this war, but it's also this like war for the mind and for the emotion, for the philosophy, for the heart of the country that, where it's all being fought on so many different battlefronts,
Yeah. So when I'm thinking about the poetry that came out of this time period, and I'm thinking like mostly like the early 1930s and through the rest of that decade is the work that I was looking at. I have a few different poets, and definitely a main theme between all of them is exile and what that does to your identity. They all had to flee Spain and move to different countries, Paris or Mexico and all over, because their work was that threatening to the fascist regime. And to be uprooted and have this, like, your sense of place turned upside down and really just taken away from you. It's like a death for these writers. And you'll hear through some of the work that it really is, it becomes this, the language that's used is really heavy. It weighs really heavy on the heart. It's very vulnerable. And I often, when I'm reading some of the works, I'm wondering, is this a love poem to a former partner or lover, or is the partner and lover Spain? So I brought in, I gathered some poems that, have to do with that, as well as some inspiring runs about movements. And I want to read you, along that line, I want to read you this poem by Maria Enciso. And I apologize for my Spanish pronunciation. It's not very good. Dave, feel free to chime in, and Bobby for the fact of the matter.
Sehr gut, danke. Danke, Dan.
Danke. Bitte, bitte. So yeah, I'll give you a quick bio of her. And then I want to read you a poem that she wrote. And I will say the poem is my translation of the work. And I approached the translation. My approach to the translation was done as step one was a completely literal translation, and thinking about the rules of grammar in Spanish and really trying to figure out the literal meaning of the poem. And from there, I just make slight tweaks to make it, I guess, to make the poem, to make the work flow like a poem, because sometimes, a direct translation doesn't actually come out poetically. And if you're thinking about when you write a poem, I mean, just think about writing a poem in English and then asking somebody to translate that, and how many different ways it could be done. And, how many different ways, like a metaphor of a rose, if you're just trying to translate that as a rose, is that good enough? Or is it representing something else and you should translate it to what it's representing? There's so many questions involved in translation. And by no means do I have an extensive, long history in translation. And I'm not super well practiced. But this was basically an exercise that I think is beneficial. And I think it's an entryway into this work. So if you hear something that you really like, you can go explore it further and get into it, because there's so much amazing work that happened around this time. So this first poet is Maria Enciso. And she lived from 1908 to 1949. She was a poet, journalist, and teacher. She began teacher training at age 15. And then in 1923, she moved to Barcelona and became involved with the student resistant movements at Rios Rosas, which there were student residences there, and there was a lot of activity going on. She signed a very important manifesto, La Asociación de Amigos de la Unión Soviética. Again, apologies. And she was part of two major unions at the time, and helped with the work of women's rights in the CNT and the National Workers Union that was so prominent in Barcelona at the time. Eventually, when the war broke out, she was acting as a delegate for the Republic, and she was helping children flee to Belgium for safety. Eventually, Hitler invaded Europe, and she was no longer able to help these children flee to Belgium, and even France and England is where she was helping people get to. So she eventually just had to leave, and she moved to Colombia, where she sought exile, and then eventually moved to Cuba to work as a journalist, and finally died in Mexico. So she was all over, and she never got a return to Spain. So knowing that, I think that's important context for this poem. So it's called You Hurt Me, Spain. You hurt me, Spain, wounded me. This fervent torture I wear, your clear footprint, pristine, exact. My traces nailed to your gritty shore, hands open on harsh terrain, blood to blood, diluted agony, and I, raw, on your splayed cross. What comes up for you, the two of you?
Yeah, let me let me get after that. Just, I am blown away by the idea that this woman's life, that she was in teacher training at 15. First of all, that is just mind-boggling to me. What 15-year-old is ready to teach? And then to exile, I'm assuming, in the 30s, and then spend the last 10 years in 3 different countries. And this is in the 40s, right? So she's in Colombia, Mexico, and then dies in Mexico at age, was it 32? No, 42, which feels so young. And I feel like it's a life that, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, Danny, I feel like this idea of these words that push out, right? So like what's sticking with me from the poem is blood to blood. And yeah, what that evokes to me, it's like blood is where you're from. It's your link to your heritage and to your past, but it's also this lifeblood. So yeah, it, even though it was such a short snippet, it really feels like it spoke just in these beautiful little moments and these beautiful little words. So yeah, that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, for me, Dan, I would say, yeah, that blood idea and what you said before about whether these poets are writing for a lover or for writing for Spain is so interesting. And like, these anarchists are fighting for a new Spain, or like a Spain of their dreams and visions. And, you know, in the end, they lost, and Spain was like an awful, awful place under Franco. And, you know, Spain also has like a really awful history of colonization. But that these anarchists were fighting, you know, it's like, yeah, maybe there was a possibility, and still is a possibility, for an anarchist Spain. And that reminds me of the US, like, you know, like, is there anything worth saving about the US? Well, yeah, there's a history of struggle. There's the Wobblies. There's, you know, movements against racism and sexism. So yeah, it brings up that question for me in our context. And I think I'm always wrestling with that question. So loved it, Dan. Loved it.
Yeah. I was thinking about the same thing, Bob. It's like trying to think about that in our current climate.
No, I think you had it right with climax.
Our current climax. Because this is the climax of the podcast, everybody. We've reached it. No, but to think about, yeah, the current climate, like always trying to connect it back to that and what we're going through right now. And, you know, hearing people speak about like, oh, you know, if this person gets elected, I'm moving to Canada, like I'm fleeing the US, and thinking about like the amount of times I reject a patriotism for this country, or feeling proud to be from this country or something. And then thinking about like, I have the choice to be here. I have the choice to come and go. I have the choice to openly have that thought and speak it aloud. And, you know, this person is such an early age, is dedicating their life to their community and giving so much to their community. And then they're forced to leave, and they can never come back. And it's, yeah, that's just, it's tragic. It's devastating. And it's, you feel this by these words. You think about the struggles that we're going through today. And you wonder, how can I connect that? How can I tap into that, emotion and feel that for myself, in today's climate? Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, that seems like a perfect place to leave it for the ep. And we have so much more to go into, but we are coming to that time. Dave, does that seem like where we're at, or how are you feeling?
Oh yeah, Bob. Love it. I'm ready to get my Did You Know on.
Did you know? Dave, sing us in, would you?
Hey, did you know?
Hey, did you know?
Hey, did you know? Hey, did you know?
Well, it's my week for the Did You Know? And so I have like sort of a 3 Did You Knows. Well, today is December 13th when we're recording. So by the time this is published, what I'm talking about will have already passed. However, tomorrow, the 14th, is Electors Day. And so did you know that tomorrow is the day that the electors vote for the president? But even more importantly is, did you know that yours truly and Dan Cantrick participated in our own form of activism 4 years ago on Electors Day? And in Denver, Colorado, we tried to persuade the electors to become faithless electors in order to try to spark a movement across the electors to not vote for the Orange Menace. And so the final Did You Know is, did you know that there were 7 faithless electors last election across different states? None in Colorado. We were not successful. And maybe the final Did You Know is, did you know that the Supreme Court made that unconstitutional so that electors cannot go faithless this time around? So I'm going to end it there.
Good info, Bob. Well, I'm going to hit you up with the way to get after thriving in dystopia. And it's always writing me at davepeachtree@gmail.com. You can also try me at davefocusman@gmail.com. You can hit us up on our website, Thriving in Dystopia. Follow Bob at bmaze19 on Twitter or the Instagram, thriving_in_dystopia. And want to thank Dan for being here this week. But, you know, it's not over yet, Danny. Sounds like we got you coming back for more. And I am certainly looking forward to it.
So grateful, Dan. Thank you so much.
Yes, much love to the two of you. I appreciated this conversation so much, and I appreciate all the work you do to help us thrive in these times.
Thanks, Danny. Love you guys. See you soon.
What's up, Thriving Crew? Bob and Dave want to take a second to thank you for lending them your ears. They also want to thank the artists for making everything a little more beautiful. The intro song is In Heaven by Drake Stafford. Our audio is edited by the consummate and dexterous Nadir Chayech. Web design by Chris the Mixer Sawyer. And of course, visual art is by the prolific and enigmatic Joe Shine. And finally, our new outro song is a cover of Can't Help Falling in Love by our editor, Nadir. See you next week.